finish off my final year.
I'm gonna miss.
Okay.
Will you paint a room teal so we can have that
Yeah.
color? Okay.
I probably will
love
actually.
that
I've got a
room.
little paint left, and those pictures might follow me. I might try and do something new. It's often quite dark, that room. So for when I'm doing one-to-one therapy, sometimes online it's a bit sort of like I'm just like a head, and it's all even in the middle of the day, which isn't always the most inviting.
Well, it's very dignified and formal looking. So
Yeah.
And the teal is nice.
Oh, thanks, guys.
Moving is hard though.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Well, today is the 27th Solid Ground live stream, and we are joined by Val Thomas. We're so glad to have you here to have this chat with us today, and happy to see everyone. And David, would you like to start us off with the Solid Ground intro so people can know what we're up to?
Yep, thanks, Leslie. So Solid Ground is a peer support community for anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice, CSJ, aka woke and or COVID mandates in their workplace, university, children's school, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies and answer the question, where do we go from here? You can join one of our groups for only $5 per month. To find out how to join our community, please visit solidgroundsupport.com. And please note, Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy or legal advice, and nothing we do should be construed as such.
Excellent. Well, so Val is the founder of Critical Therapy Antidote, and we had a conversation, the two of us, for this channel a couple of months ago, and it was a great conversation. It's really informative and just a good discussion about how critical social justice theory has infiltrated the therapy fields and the implications of that, and where do we go from here. And so if you want to check that out, please go just do a search in the videos, or perhaps I can even put a link under this after we stop the live stream. I'll link to that video. And I'll also link to CTA, Critical Therapy Antidote, and to the CTA podcast, which is fantastic. And Val edited and co-authored a book recently about critical social justice theory in therapy and what that means. And it's called Cynical Therapies. There, she's got the book up. Highly recommend this book to anybody who's curious about this topic, wants to learn more. And it's the reason this channel was started. It's the whole reason we began having these discussions on this channel was my concern about what I was experiencing in this area. And so I'm just really glad we can open this up and have a discussion today about this. So thanks for being with us, Val.
Well, it's great to be here, Leslie, and to be with all of you. And I look forward to the discussion. And I'll be very interested to hear people's thoughts and comments about the work and basically our thoughts about what's happening with the field and how we move on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's something that it touches all of us, both professionally and personally, and in so many ways. And there's so many reasons why it's wonderful to have the therapy professions available to people. But if therapists are ideologically compromised and they're actually not there to help you on an individual level, but rather to push through social engineering projects, it changes the entire. It changes the playing field for everyone, and it changes the offering, and it's a real reason for concern. So, Jennifer, did you had a real keen interest to speak with Val about this, and what are some burning questions that you have or topics that you have that you want to talk about?
First off, I just wanted to say I loved this book. I loved it. I felt like it was just this feeling of like when you go to the chiropractor and they realign your spine. It's just like, yes, this is exactly what I've been experiencing. This is what I've heard other people talk about, that, their programs have been completely infiltrated, that they went to school to train to become a therapist with the idea of understanding the individual and the family and their relationships. And instead, they felt like they were basically being trained to become activists. And then I've heard from people, and these stories are actually really horrible, but I've heard from people who have actually gone to therapy and then basically been kind of traumatized by the therapist because the therapist has tried to indoctrinate them. And so I'm so happy that this book exists, and I'm recommending it to everybody I could think of. But so, yeah, thank you, Val, for coming on today. And I'd like to know for you personally, Val, what made you interested in doing this book? Like what really grabbed you and made you think we need a book about this?
Well, it happened. It was happening towards the end of 2020, when we'd set up the CTA platform, and there was this complete and utter lack of any published critique. And I had expected. I mean, I'd started to write on James Lindsay's site, New Discourses, and I expected to see more and more writings, but there was nothing. Nothing was appearing. And I was also very aware of the way in which people were being threatened by cancellation. And I've probably, out of all of the professions, for a therapist to be castigated as a reactionary bigot, that's like a professional death. So it seemed to me that we had to make a start somewhere, and the way to do it was to collect a group of people together who felt okay about sticking their head above the parapet and focusing on a particular aspect of the field, their area of practice or their area of experience. And we were incredibly lucky, because we got together a group that had a really wide range. So we've got all different psych professions in there. Psychologists, clinical psychologists, social psychologists, psychotherapists, counselors, family therapists. This wasn't by design, it was just the people who showed up. We've also got, it's international, so we've got glimpses into the UK and glimpses into North America, which is brilliant. And we also have kind of different stages of professional development also. So we've got people who are sort of senior theoreticians, and we've got people at earlier stages of their therapy journey. And we've also got people who are doing PhDs into particular aspects of therapy in society. So I can't remember. Yes, I've gone a bit off from your question, Jen, but it's once it had started, then it took off, and everybody was in agreement. We've got to get this out as soon as we can, and we just pulled in all the help that we needed in order to do this. So we didn't actually know what we were doing. This is an organic. Everything to do with CTA has been an organic developmental process, but that's also what I think is very important about it. It's got a life of its own, and it's coming out in a particular form.
Yeah, I think that when an organization grows organically, it stays very authentic, because you're responding to what you see and the needs that you see. You're responding directly towards those. And
this is what therapy is supposed to be.
Yes.
I mean, it's in a way what I hoped to do, although I kind of realized this more in retrospect rather than at the beginning. I hoped to sort of implement the principles of therapy into the organization. It's almost like to hold those principles and to allow those principles to manifest themselves in terms of the work, because it's almost as if the field is become unanchored from those foundational principles. So actually, I'm going to go back round to the other reason. The other reason for doing this, Jen, was I thought it was crucially important that the general public needed to understand that therapy was going awry. And I really, really wanted to alert them. That's why we spent so much time on making very complex material digestible and accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah.
I
And
cannot
the book.
tell you the amount of time. I mean, the amount of back and forth. And also, we had Helen Pluckrose come in, and she was absolutely fantastic on this. So, yeah, I'd be forever sending chapter drafts back to the authors saying it's not digestible enough, it's not accessible enough. They kind of got pretty fed up with me after a while, but Helen was very much on the case with that because she and James Lindsay produced such an extraordinary classic, cynical theories, which provided a digest of super complex kind of intellectual theory in a way that any reasonably educated person could really grasp and work with. And that was our ideal.
Yeah, someone asks in the chat, this is going over to the chat. Gin Bottle says, I thought Cynical Therapies was by James Lindsay. No, that's Cynical Theories. And so did you choose the name of this book based on a play on that?
We riffed on it.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, that's how I found CTA and you as well, Val, was through the New Discourses. The essay that you did there. I when I was in school, I was finding it was hard to understand the dissonance, the discrepancy between what was being taught in terms of classical notions of therapy alongside social justice learning. And I still don't understand how professionals in this field can hold both. I don't understand how they're able to think in both, because they're so inherently contradictory.
I don't think they're able. I mean, that's the thing that I've really found. I mean, I agree. That's the thing that I've found very difficult to understand too. It's about how these are obviously two radically different worldviews, and we've been sold that critical social justice is an evolution of an earlier impoverished form of social justice, or a sort of old form of social justice, and there's this new expanded way of thinking about social justice. And if you're not on board with that, then you are you're like a dinosaur, you're reactionary, or you're bigoted in some kind of way. But it's not an evolution, it's a completely different worldview. I mean, I say that in nearly every essay I write. And that's the thing that I found the most difficult thing for me. It's why senior clinicians and theoreticians in our field have not made that explicit and clear. Nobody will go there.
Yeah, it was really stunning to me to go from a family systems class, a family systems therapy class, where you're talking about these intricate ways that your family history and the way that your parents grew up affects little things about your role in your family of origin, and then how the interplay between you and your spouse and your children and all these little delicate things, and then go next class into a multicultural perspectives class where you're told white women do this. And it's just the simplification. Oh, Black people are like this. And just stunning contrast in the depth and the quality of the thinking.
And that's my sense really of the whole field, that it's becoming it's regressed, it's becoming narrower and narrower, and it's sort of reducing the extraordinary complexity of human psychology down to this unbelievably kind of rigid diagnostic. I just find that astonishing that we've accepted that.
I was just wondering, Val, did your mind ever go to wondering why the field of therapy and psychology was becoming kind of hijacked in such a way? Was there something to do with the type of people that get attracted to those roles? Was your mind ever going there at all to what is it about a psychological makeup of someone who goes into that profession, and therefore their ability to sort of just easily take on contradictory ideas without necessarily having the self-awareness to realize they're doing it.
I mean, that's an interesting take, David. I mean, I have had some thoughts. I mean, I'd like to hear you speak a bit more about that, because it's clear that you've thought about that. My thoughts about how why therapy professionals have taken this on board is because they were sold. They've taken on a narrative, so that all those rhetorical strategies for critical social justice have landed in a place where they've just been absorbed. So social justice now means this, yeah. They've taken on board all of that, and maybe this overlaps a little bit with what you were intimating in the question. There's something about people being. It attracts very empathic people into the profession, and this attaches itself to that empathy. Is that where you're going with this?
Yeah, I guess, and I think also, yeah, it's got so many contradictions to it, hasn't it? The ideology, and we've been learning about systemic lenses this year, which I found really helpful. And one of the principles is a double bind. This idea of sort of putting people into positions in which they're getting contradictory messages, and that is actually the thing that creates psychological distress and probably makes you very malleable as a result. So the contradiction of diversity being something that we all desperately want more of, and apparently advocate for, and yet at the same time, a diversity of opinion isn't actually advocated for at all, and in fact the complete opposite message is being given to people. So I guess I'm going back into kind of thinking about the messaging and the systems rather than the individuals, but I'm constantly wondering how much of it is the individual, how much of it is the theory. But I think, yeah, the empathy is certainly something that can get hijacked, as you say.
There's also, there's other factors at play in this, and one factor is that the demographics of the profession have changed. So it wasn't so long ago that this was this was a profession that you went into when you were changing career. So it's like mature career changers would go into the profession, so they'd have far more kind of life experience. That doesn't mean to say they're better therapists, yeah. But the demographics have changed, and I certainly noticed it over the years that I was teaching and also practicing, that the people going into the training were getting younger and younger and younger. So, and we used to have a big thing in the training program, where I taught. We had this big thing, and we had big arguments with the university about, we don't want to let people in under 25.
Mm-hmm.
And the university came back saying, no, you can't have that exception. You have to allow people 21 and above coming in. So there's that issue. So people coming in with little life experience are much more easily persuaded. And they also don't have that. There's also this stuff about, one thing hopefully we learn as we get older, not everybody does, is that life is ridiculously complicated. And all our certainties from youth, our reality comes in and whisks them away. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. What you said there about complicated and how things change as you mature. It does seem like the kind of empathy, the kind of like I hear people say this is weaponized empathy. This is sort of a hijacked compassion, but it's a simple sort of compassion, and it's a myopic and narrowly focused empathy and compassion that is being facilitated or created with this social justice thing. Like in a human sexuality class that I was taught in school, in my graduate program, for instance, we talked about how hard it is for a trans person to be rejected by their partner when they come out after years of marriage as trans. And so the example is a man who says, I I'm going to transition to being a woman. His wife rejects him, and he's left sad because his wife and children have rejected him. And this was poured on very heavily to create a sense of empathy for that person. But the thing is, there's empathy for all people involved in that situation, or there should be, and there could be, and it could look at the way that it impacts every single person in that family system. And we were taught to vilify the family for rejecting this poor, vulnerable person, that these horrible people are not more inclusive and can't understand. And those are the people that need to be re-educated. And so it seems like a very narrow focus for that empathy. So even the empathetic person is being taught to close down their sense of connection to lots of the human experience by only valuing the minority position in all cases.
It's a really interesting point, Leslie. I think it's like empathy isn't being tempered by wider considerations and also by realism. So like empathy is the main thing that you have, and then it's focused in a very particular way. It's harnessed, isn't it? In a very particular way to specific groups. But there's nothing else that comes in to temper that.
It's basically
I'm also-
describing who you can feel empathy for, so then if you really followed that model and you were looking at everything through the lens of privilege, maybe you could say like a white person who had their home broken into by a Black person, and that was your traumatized client. You, instead of working with that person to overcome their trauma, you point out to the white client that, they should sort of count their blessings and check their privilege, because after all, they've never faced racial discrimination. And that is what has contributed to this person robbing them. It's like, it is. It's sort of prescribing and saying who you're allowed to be empathetic towards and who you're not. And it really is the politicization of therapy. And it sort of makes me think of back in the Soviet Union, they deemed it a mental illness to disagree with the government.
That's right, yeah.
It very much reminds me of that way of thinking. It's like authoritarianism injected into therapy.
Well, it's not therapy.
Right.
It just isn't therapy. We've really got to find some new terms. That's my sense.
Yes, what would we call it?
Social engineering.
I mean, in a way,
psychological engineering.
But the problem, I think, that's because I've been thinking about this. I think that they've captured the term therapy, and I think that I think the field is fracturing now. So it's sort of inevitable. And that the people who have a commitment to healing are going to either go out to the margins or move on and create parallel structures, which is really what CTA is involved. But I don't think we're going to be able to take the term therapy out of the field. I think we're going to have to think of a new term for the healing work or the healing ethos. In the work that we do, we're going to have to find something else. And then therapy will be left behind as this empty term, which actually means moral re-education.
Moral re-education.
It's a long-term kind of process, I think. But I haven't yet found a term. I've been hunting around and I haven't found a term for our new psych professions.
Yeah. Oh,
so I'm open to any suggestions. Yeah, I'm open to any suggestions.
They've stolen the term of therapy.
That's right.
They're using it essentially as cover for moral re-education.
That's right. That's exactly what they're doing. Just like they've done that to education, haven't they?
Right.
Yes.
In the States,
very
particularly.
Much.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
So it's not education.
No, it's not. It's completely indoctrination. Yes.
It is hard to come up with a term. I really racked my brain on this when I decided, okay, I'm not going to do this licensed route. I'm not finishing this degree, but I want to still take my skills and apply them. what do I do? What do I call myself? And I've not settled on anything that I like. I don't know what you call this work. I don't like coaching. I don't like that word. It's just what we have right now.
You probably wouldn't want to use this, but I like the notion of it, of like midwifery. I mean, because in some sense, there's this, moving someone through something that something going to be different at the other end when they come out, like in stepping into something new. But that obviously comes with a lot of other thoughts and feelings.
But I like that idea, Deborah, that sort of notion of this accompanying somebody through a crisis or a complex process of growth and development in a way that facilitates that process. I mean, in the olden days, we would be priests and priestesses, but obviously we can't.
It is shamanic too, right? So I don't know if there are shamanic terms without getting too woo-woo, right? Something that comes from
we
that,
can't use
that
we
world.
can't use
Yeah.
So there's something out there in the ether that wants to come through.
Yeah, this touches on a question that David raised right before we started about what we do with the profession from here. David, how did you phrase that?
Yeah, I can't remember now. I was thinking of coming along this evening and asking you the question, Val, of just what do we kind of give up on the current institutions and educational societies, and then create our own? Do we fight within and try and influence? And I guess the fact that you're already considering that we may need to change the fundamental language that we use, that, as you say, parallel institutions like the CTA, which, by the way, I just want to say a massive thank you, Val, because I think when I was coming into my course, and I felt very isolated and like I was going a bit mad and like I didn't understand exactly what was happening around me. CTA was incredibly useful for me, as well as Counterweight, and it's really started me off on the journey of being here at Solid Ground. So thanks for that. But
that's great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, but I guess my question, was just whether or not do we give up on current institutions. I mean, I'm listening to Peter Boghossian at the moment talking about how he's given up, and I know. Yeah. I think I've heard Leslie say plenty of times that we need to give up and create our own now. But I also know that you mentioned before we started that there might be ways in which we could think about protecting ourselves and going in with a certain level of resilience. If you'd like to talk more about that as well.
Well, I think it's very easy to be prescriptive, and there is one way forward, but the ways forward that we can see express our personalities. So my personality would make me tend towards a bit extreme, would make me tend towards a separate, following that separate path, casting the institutions aside because I think that they are completely corrupt, and setting up parallel institutions. That would be my way. But I have to accept that there are other people, different kind of personalities and ways of working in the world, who have talked about becoming more getting in dialogue with the institutions and starting to work with them in order to see whether they could. There is a place where the institutions can shift or change. So listen, we don't know. I mean, we're in such a massive epochal shift. We're right bang in the middle of it. We've got no idea how this is going to play out, have we? All we know is we just tune in and we can kind of get a feeling for it. So that's as best. I mean, that's a pretty, I don't know, a slightly muddled response, but that's as best as I can do. But I'm also aware that a lot of people are trapped inside institutions, and it's important for us to develop psychotherapeutic and counselling tools out of the kind of rich heritage that we have of knowledge in the professions, to see whether we can adapt them for people who are more trapped inside these systems.
You know, something that occurs to me is perhaps we should spend a little time defining what it is that is threatened by the way things are going right now. How are these new influences and ways of teaching therapists, and just how is this ideology actually harmful to individuals and to the culture? It seems like I think everybody has a sense of that they come in with, but have we talked about precisely what those concerns are that we have?
I can give one example just because I was listening to Stephanie Wynn this morning, and I didn't listen to all of it. She was just interviewing a more conservative therapist. And, there's a swath of clients who have particular political views that at this point in time may go to a therapist who's holding these critical social justice views, who may be trying to reprogram them, telling them that they're thinking wrong, can't even hold space for them. And so that's a huge, that could make a whole bunch of people who could really benefit from therapy really feel like they have nowhere to go. And so that's to have a bunch of people that might need some mental health support that can't get it. To me, that seems like a huge cost.
Mm-hmm.
It attacks the individual. So my sense of it is it has a sort of a global impact, and the impact is to weaken the sense of self. So it weakens people's agency. So this notion that whatever difficult issues you have, you can place at the door of systems, oppressive systems, and you can't use your own agency to make any difference. So it weakens a sense of agency. It weakens the capacity for deeper self-insight, because you're given an interpretation of the world, and you're then so there's no investigation of the self. It weakens relationships, because you can't, in critical social justice, there's no sense of that you can relate across identity groups. You're an avatar, and you're of a particular group identity, and so the only kind of relationships that can be supported in that are transactional relationships. So there's no capacity to use relationship as a means of really connecting with the other in any kind of way. It increases, it reduces people's capacity to regulate dysregulated emotions. This is really, really important. So if you come along with dysregulated emotions, particularly emotions that are promoted by this ideology, such as anger and resentment. I mean, resentment isn't actually, it's an emotional state, but it isn't a pure emotion. These are just further consolidated. So you don't go through the very challenging processes in therapy, whereby you become more able to identify what's creating difficult emotions for you, and find ways and methods in order to regulate them. So those are just some of them. So it's a whole package that weakens the individual.
So that's interesting, because that's the things that are the reverse of that are things like self-reliance and emotional regulation, and
exactly.
These things that are now that it's written into the ideology that these things are to be looked down upon, that they're equated with whiteness and white supremacy, and so they write it right into that. So if you're saying that these things are going to be lost if we do things this way, then the social justice response is to say, so what? That's good. We don't want those things. We don't need that. Don't tone police us.
Right.
We don't want to increase stoicism.
Yeah.
Right. Right. It seems like it actually wants to increase resentment and to very much sort of steer people into having an external locus of control. Absolutely. All of your problems are because you are in this, racist, patriarchal, deeply flawed society. And the answer isn't internal. It's not to look within and figure out how to manage your emotions and figure out how to navigate the world. Your happiness is dependent upon the world changing, and the answer to your problems is to go forward and become this sort of critical social justice activist. And so therapy is training people into that activism. And it's the opposite of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the most sort of evidence-backed and most researched therapy that we have, that very much trains people into resilience and trains people to examine what they're thinking and look and see, are they having cognitive distortions? Are they engaging in mind reading? Are they catastrophizing? This teaches one to catastrophize. It teaches a person to make assumptions. Oh, this person did this. Well, that was a microaggression, and that's because I'm female, or because I'm trans, or because I'm not white. So it's sort of training people into a sort of paranoid, resentful state, I think.
But also just makes them in service of the revolution. The client isn't a client for you to heal. The client is an agent for your revolution.
That's right, exactly, Deborah.
Oh, yeah. How objectifying. Yeah. That's a good way of putting that. Yeah.
And I was very surprised that we were told that our number one job was to be an activist. That's your number one job. I was told when I was in graduate school to become a counselor. A counselor is first and foremost an activist for social justice before anything else.
I know teachers that have been told that as well in their teaching programs, teachers that are going to be teaching elementary school students. We
just bought a Guinness Book of World Records for my boys. 2022 World Records. That seemed like a fun thing. The first chapter is devoted to activism, how to be an activist. And it's just right there, right away. It's about be an activist. Here's the things that are so bad in the world. Here's the things that are terrible. And you can go out and push back. And it's just a bunch of Greta Thunberg and stuff, it's just be an activist. You're supposed to want to do this.
But it's everywhere, Leslie,
it's everywhere.
Isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's everywhere you look. Mm-hmm. The tendrils have got so deeply in. Mm-hmm. There isn't a space left. So I had I take an archaeological magazine every month, because in a previous life I was an archaeologist, and I opened it up and looked at the book reviews, and the first book review was a book on archaeology for young people, and it was written by the head of the Council of British Archaeology, so very sort of, hold a very elite position. And the title of the book was, I can remember it rightly now, it was something like lessons from our ancestors, and the subtitle was Equality, Inclusion and Sustainability in the Past. And you gotta think,
wow.
But it's historical revisionism, like the 1619 Project. So it's like these kids, it's everywhere. So these kids are now reading about this. It's like everything was fine until modernity and the Europeans. Yeah,
it's woke washing.
It's woke washing. That's the word I was searching for. So go back to this rather lovely past, historic past, when people they were sustainable. They had a sustainable view, and they included everybody. And they these nice little communities. It was and we've gone. We went wrong. that horrible kind of white European society came along, and now we're going to get it all back. I mean, it's just,
oh, it's so dull. It's so dull, isn't it? It's like it's we're in this position where it's sort of like I mean, in a way it's a good thing that it's so dull, because everybody who's got an ounce of curiosity is going to start looking elsewhere, because even on our course, like myth, religion, culture, spirituality, all those things, kind of as Deborah was saying earlier, have just become like a way of framing you or a person into a political chess piece. That's all it is. It's just like a dot on a power curve or something. There's nothing more interesting about it. It's just so dull. It's such a waste of people's time. I know it's not dullness probably isn't as a bigger issue as, you know, indoctrination of kids, but for me, for David Simpson on my training course, it's rather dull.
It's unbearably reductive. Absolutely unbearably reductive. It's like reducing, I'm repeating myself a bit, the extraordinary complexity of life, right down to this cookie cutter. Cut, you know, all the same. And, you know, if I mean, sometimes in darker moments, I kind of think, we're being set up, aren't we? For a totalitarian society. We're being groomed for it.
You know, I'll go there with you.
Oh, you should have come on our tinfoil hat episode. You should have come on the tinfoil hat episode a week ago.
Deborah, you still have yours there, Deborah. Do you want to tell us some? Want to wear that while you have the discussion?
I don't want to say that that's where we're going necessarily, but there is the fact that people could fold so easily, like the fact that people could take on something with seemingly not questioning, right? Yeah. Across so many, I mean, it does. I know there's the social pressures and the fear of cancellation and all of that, but it is, I mean, with COVID too, it is bewildering the degree to which there's compliance, like so much compliance that does suggest it's an open field for some totalitarian thing. I don't know whether it's planned or not, but it's you're like, whoa, look at the population, look what they'll do.
Yeah, it is it's kind of frightening, and it makes me lose my faith in humanity. But then I talk to people like you and the Solid Ground members, and my faith in humanity goes back up. So thank God for that. But it does strike me as amazing that not only is this a very narrow lens through which to see the world, I think it's a dramatically flawed lens, and it has been accepted by so many people. Even, you know, those little apps that you can get on here, it's called Nextdoor, and it's, you know, people saying, I've lost my cat, has anybody seen my cat? It amazes me that in those conversations, people are dropping in little critical social justice bombs. Or if somebody says something that they think, like if somebody's too critical of crime now, somebody will drop in a critical social justice bomb. And I just got all my comments on Sunday deleted because I was sarcastically saying, oh, why, yes, we should all go looting. Looting is fine. Because somebody was basically saying, we're only, crime is only happening because of inflation, and Republicans are using this as a talking point, and, you know, foolish people such as yourself, I mean, to somebody else. It's just nuts. It's like you can't escape it.
Yeah, it's starting to infiltrate and pepper into, you know, just normal discourse.
Yes, just everyday conversations that you would have with your neighbors. It becomes politicized. If somebody's too upset about their car being broken into, it's sort of being insinuated, but that perhaps they're lacking in empathy and maybe they're a bit racist.
I have a question. Oh, go ahead.
So, Jennifer, what do you do with that then? Do you respond?
Well, so I try not to get into fights with people on Twitter or on Nextdoor, but on Sunday I woke up feeling rather devilish. And so I suggested that we all meet at a local restaurant, Jackson's, and have Chardonnay and then go looting together. And that we target the people whose homes have the signs, hate has no home here, because they won't mind. So, and that was promptly deleted by the moderators.
Chardonnay and looting.
Yeah.
It's all very civilized.
It's the new brunch. Yeah. That's
Yeah, I had a question, Val. I may sort of know an answer, but I want to have you kind of tell it for listeners, our audience. What do you suggest now for a person who's a potential client trying to navigate how to get through here? I know CTA has some resources, but what would you suggest for someone who's like, I want therapy, I kind of heard this stuff is going on. What do I do?
Well, first you need to interview several therapists, and go by recommendations as well. But there's some kind of there's I've been trying to think about what's a key question, and I think a key question that could be asked, and I'd be interested to know what others here think about this. A key question that might be able to identify a woke therapist really quickly is, you could ask, how would you diagnose? If I can get the right wording for this. What would you take into consideration when you are thinking about diagnosing my problems? Now, the reason I think it's something like that, and I don't know what you think about this, David, because what you want to find out is whether they're going to, whether a critical social justice driven therapy approach will always diagnose through societal factors or external factors. So if the therapist you're interviewing comes back to you and says, I kind of, we really need to think about what kind of, your identity, and we need to think about, to what extent what you're experiencing is the result of oppressive societal factors. They'll be a bit more subtle than this. Then that's an indication that somebody is traveling down that route. And if somebody says, well, goodness me, I take into a wide range, we think about your upbringing, your formative experiences, we think about, significant events that have happened to you. We might take into account also what's happening in, your cultural background, your societal background. Yeah. So what do you think about that?
I think that's a good question. I was thinking like you could go straight to kind of asking what of my identity profile would need to be considered, or your identity profile, or the differences between identity profiles would need to be considered. But then I almost don't know if that would be slightly encouraging a social justice approach. Maybe I don't know, because you are then putting importance on identity when actually, as you've just said, Val, identity kind of can be pulled apart by thinking about upbringing and geography and all these bigger things that maybe are informing identity, but in a way come before. So I think that's a good start, definitely.
So you really want to get a sense of whether this is a broad-based therapy, traditional therapy approach, which considers all factors, or whether they're coming out of that very, very narrow worldview. But there will also be alert to that, and you have to be careful with this, because you might be considered as somebody who will be a candidate for moral re-education. So they might position themselves in a way where it's not so apparent. So this isn't based on any kind of anecdotal experience or many reports. One of the things that's missing for us is that we don't have that many insider accounts of what it's like for clients.
My sense is that if you get somebody who's really into the ideology to talk long enough, you'll start to pick it up, because you'll hear the phrases that they'll use. There'll be repetitive phrasing, and you'll start to know pretty quickly, because they'll signal it to you. And I think that I like that question, but I think it's a really subtle one. And I think that I don't know how many clients will be thinking to ask that kind of thing. And I hear what you're saying. If you come right out and state your own position, that you might be targeted as a candidate for re-education. But I tend to think that most of the people who hold these ways of thinking will just reject you outright if you're too strong in that camp. Like I was told in my program, we're training counselors who aren't going to be able to work with the Trump supporter. We are not going to be able to work with you. We can't work with you. You're turned away. You will not be, we're not interested in you, you know? So it's this sort of immediate rejection of you as something that's not worth our time. And I think that that there are probably so many therapists who are worried about being sniffed out as non-woke right now, that you might have a tendency to hear therapists who aren't sure of your position make semi-pandering gestures towards the woke because they don't know why you're asking them. They might think you're going to report them for wrongthink or cancel them somehow if they're not woke. And I think so many therapists are hiding behind, not sure how to talk about this because they know it's what's expected of them, especially young, newly trained therapists. So my suggestion personally would probably be to come right out with it and state your own case plainly and just say, I have these problems in my life. I want to talk to somebody about these issues that I'm dealing with. I am really concerned with ideology and therapy. And I notice your bio, you don't have pronouns or anything. I'm hoping that maybe we'll be able to just speak plainly because I'm concerned about CRT and queer theory and therapy. And I'd like to just know your where are you with this? And you'll probably get a flummoxed and frustrated and defensive person pretty quickly if they are on board with that. Or maybe they will be subtle with that and come back with reasons why you should consider this, but I think you'll hear where they're at. That would be my suggestion, would just be right up front with it. But
I like that, Leslie. That's very sort of straightforward. And that other thing about look on their websites, because you can see. I mean, some people they may well put a bit of it on the website, a bit of the ideological stuff, but that's because everybody's trying to pass, aren't they? Just as Leslie is saying. But if they put an awful lot of it, you can pick up that they are they're an advocate, and particularly if they label themselves. I'm
an able-bodied queer,
non-binary.
What about a question like? Oh, go on, Deborah.
I was going to say, the whole trauma-informed thing has been a tricky territory because, I think that initially maybe meant someone had some trauma training, but now that does seem to have a political valence. What's your take on that, Val?
Oh, I mean, this is a really, really tricky one because it's just become a trope now. So it's like my view on it is that it's an indication of an ideological commitment now. It's got nothing to do with trauma itself, real, trauma-informed work. It's a statement of a position. It's meaningless in terms of therapy.
Because everything can be trauma. Because
that's right.
Trauma is in the eye of the beholder, or in the eye of the victim. Okay.
Yeah. It's one of those words, isn't it? Yeah, microaggression. Yeah. I came across recently about a couple of weeks ago. There's somebody who's making this argument that we need to get beyond microaggressions now. Microaggressions by themselves. We also need to get into, I can't remember the word they used. It was something like micro. It wasn't micro compliments, but micro validations, something like that. And that we now need, as members of sort of majority identity group or communities, we need to not just refrain from microaggressions or recognize microaggressions. We have to raise people up through deliberate.
Those are okay. Okay.
Micro validations.
It's all external.
Externalizing everything. Who are going to be targeted by these unbearable sort of oh, you're looking very nice today. I really like the way you
one
did.
already
Or,
today.
you know,
I get
really
a
see your
point.
resilience. It'd be infuriating, wouldn't it?
Well, are you going to get in trouble if you're not offering enough micro validations? Is that are we going to police the number of micro validations?
You have,
Score.
yes, you will.
Literally makes me think of that episode of Black Mirror. Have you seen that one where they're walking around and they're literally just scanning each other's faces and then rating each other's interactions?
God.
And according to the rating of your interactions, you get more of a high score, and therefore you get more access to things in society. Oh wow. Okay. Yeah.
And this is something also is it links back into my sense that the title of the book, or the subtitle, which is the anti-therapeutic nature of critical social justice, I think I'd like to go one step further now when I'm thinking about it. And it's not, it's anti-therapeutic, absolutely, but it's fundamentally, it's anti-relational.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely and utterly oppositional to human relating.
Mm.
And this is the main argument in terms of conceptually and theoretically, this is the main argument against critical social justice. It doesn't stand on the same ground as traditional therapy. All the different modalities in therapy all stand on that same ground, and the ground is the therapeutic relationship. We know this as the ground. It's been proved. It's unequivocally by research that the quality of the therapeutic relationship is the main factor in successful outcomes in therapy. That's across all of the modalities. Mm-hmm. And this is anti-relational. It's anti that ground. And this is why it's kind of really, I'm going off on one now, you can haul me back in a bit, but this is something that's very kind of close to my heart and my mind, really, is that this is where I find it absolutely extraordinary that there's so little published that investigates the claim, the conceptual and theoretical case on behalf of integrating critical social justice into the therapy field. And I think one of the reasons is that they can't make that claim. It doesn't have the same epistemology, it doesn't have the same ontology as the worldview that informs traditional therapies. And furthermore, it attacks the relational ground. Anyway, my rant is...
I think that's really well described. I agree with you completely. And I wonder, in the midst of all of this, do you have any sense of optimism about where things are heading? And if so, what gives you optimism?
Well, I'm not sure about, I go up and down. Mm-hmm. I guess all of you do, don't you? You know, sometimes you think, oh yeah, we're breaking through. And then, oh no, we're on this, we're on these tram lines and we're going into this deeply captured, very, very oppressive, tyrannical societal space. It's also a bit complicated as well, Leslie, because I've got a very long view, because I was an archaeologist and I specialized in prehistory. So I'm particularly interested in seeing how society and then later on civilizations play out over very, very long periods of time. So I feel we're in one of those moments, and it could go either way, but in the end we'll come through, because that's what happens. But that's a very, very long view. And if I can, I'll give an illustration, if this is okay. So Jennifer knows this. I volunteer in Canterbury Cathedral as a guide. And in Canterbury Cathedral, the main building is 1,000 years old. And in the cathedral has, been burnt to the ground, has been attacked in various historical periods, and the thing just gets rebuilt and survives. And I'm particularly interested in the 1600s, because that's when England became a republic under Oliver Cromwell. I'm not going to give you a history lesson, don't worry. And they got rid of the king. We had a short period of when the Puritans, and they took power, and they were extreme. And you can see in the cathedral, they came into the cathedral and they started to break up anything that offended them. So they attacked the incredible medieval windows with hammers, they decapitated the statues and various other stuff. But now they're just a memory. Their time went. The townspeople rose up, forced them out, yeah, and history cycles on. So in the long term, this is what will happen. But what concerns me most is the collateral damage in the short term. I'm not sure if that rather rambly response made any kind of sense, but that's what my thinking is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. What do you guys think? I mean, where are you in regard to your predictions?
I think that what you just said makes perfect sense. And I go back and forth about, is this sort of a, not permanent, but a very long-standing change, what's going on, this new ideology? Yeah. Or is this more like a brief period of insanity, sort of something analogous to McCarthyism? And I don't know the answer. When I'm more optimistic, I think, oh, we're going to sort of beat back this nonsense and people are going to come to their senses. And this is just sort of a crazy thought trend. And maybe this is sort of like when people like critical social justice and therapy is maybe analogous to when we were doing lobotomies and thought that was the latest, greatest thing. So I do have some of those thoughts, but I do worry about the collateral damage, like you were saying, because it's not as if once people emerge from this diluted state, the person whose career has been damaged or the clients whose psyches have been damaged get everything restored to them instantaneously. So I'm interested in kind of shoring us up during this sort of crazy attempt at a cultural revolution.
Yeah, not to mention the kids whose bodies have been wrecked.
That's right. They don't get restored. Yeah. Yeah. So I think the revolution is sort of partially complete. And my question is just how much further will it go?
I think timing kind of matters too. Like what I get worried about is more and more younger people who eventually then move into being the people that are running the society. If they have this way of thinking and then they're running it, like if it can get stopped or halted or redirected before they age up, you see like even the law schools, like saying like, we are the law. And I'm like, I don't want those people being judges or something like that. So, and also if somehow this can be corrected, even from, we're talking about these people teaching this material and teaching two different things even at once. I keep wondering if the strain of the cognitive dissonance will be one factor that people can't even handle holding these things. But does that happen faster than any more totalitarian measures that might, descend on everything, right? We kind of need to, we still need to have enough freedom to kind of move and shift. So I don't know what the timing of those different forces will be.
Well, I'm looking at the time. I know Jennifer's got her group. So we need to wrap, but maybe we can have David weigh in next time with his predictions about optimism or pessimism and why.
Coming up next time.
Val, I'm so grateful that you could join us today. It's really lovely to have you here for the chat.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Val.
Very, very interesting conversation, to space to think through some ideas. Yeah.
I have to echo what Jen said earlier too, because CTA has been so meaningful to me. It's been such a lifeline to me at a time when I was really confused. So thank you.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you everybody who joined us in the chat, and we will see you next week at Monday, 10 a.m. Pacific time.